It's easy to underestimate the intelligence and skills of our ancestors because we have a tendency to think that the people who lived centuries ago weren't as capable as we are today. However, when we discover the amazing things they created, we have to challenge that position. In this video, you'll get to see some of the incredible artifacts they left behind that showcase just how clever and talented they were. What do you imagine to be the most sensible way to build a church or a cathedral? If your answer is brick by brick or stone by stone, then you're thinking of the same approach that architects and builders have used for centuries. During the 13th century in Ethiopia, though, someone thought a little differently. In the town of Lalibela, you'll find a whole series of rock-hewn churches, all of which were carved into a single lump of stone, and some of which are underground. Lalibela is a fiercely Orthodox Christian town, and the residents treat the churches as sacred spaces. Some people even believe that they were made by angels. The supernatural explanation is unlikely. But the truth is that we don't know much about who built the churches, how, or why. Looking at the Church of St. George, which is the most famous of the 11 temples, one can't help but be amazed by the precision and quality of the craftsmanship. To achieve this degree of geometrical perfection 800 years ago while carving straight into a rock surface really does seem like the work of a god. When scientific evidence or explanation isn't available, wild speculation steps in. In the case of the strange statues that can be found in Indonesia's Bada Valley, that speculation has led to supernatural explanations. Bada Valley is home to several hundred statues and other megaliths, which date back to prehistory. It's clear that this was once a densely populated area, but now it's a tiny isolated village that is unknown even to the majority of Indonesian natives. The giant statues are vaguely humanoid, but without inscriptions to accompany them, we have no idea whether they're intended to represent gods or people. Bizarrely, nobody has taken the time to date the site accurately, so theories range from it being 1,000 years old to it being closer to 5,000. The villagers are quite used to the statues, using the land around them for farming, and many have their own stories about how they came to be there. Some say that they're criminals turned to stone as a punishment. Others say that they're imbued with magical powers and ward evil spirits away from the land. There's no debating the stunning aesthetic quality of this strangely beautiful Tibetan skull. It's around 300 years old, and there are more questions about it than there are answers. The head turned up in an antique store in Vienna, Austria in 2017, and the owner of the store had a strange tale to tell about its origins. According to him, the man who gave it to the store said that the skull came from his ancestor, a doctor who had worked throughout Asia. Apparently, he was given the skull as a gift in return for treating the abbot of a Buddhist monastery in Tibet. Researchers have since studied the skull and claim that the decorative lettering carved into it is a Devanagari script. The figures are harder to decipher, and the meaning of the piece as a whole is unknown. No other examples of skulls like this from Tibet have ever been recorded, and the authenticity of the piece is impossible to prove. Regardless of whether the carvings were made hundreds of years ago or far more recently, it's a fabulous work of art. The Dazu rock carvings in Chongqing, China, are an archaeological wonder. They're a record of China's religious and cultural history, but not all of the carvings there make sense. Historians and archaeologists are especially interested in the Ximinshan area of the Dazu rock carvings, which are divided into 16 groups and were created during the Song dynasty about 1,000 years ago. While most of these carvings are focused on Buddhist and Taoist themes, including a superb work of art known as the Buddhist Wheel of Life, there are exceptions. One carving, that of a humanoid figure with a strange face, holds a long cylindrical object which looks a little like a telescope. Some observers have even said it looks like an old telephone receiver. Fittingly, the carving is known as the Statue of Clairvoyance. He stands next to a sculpture of the Jade Emperor and is said to represent a person who was capable of seeing thousands of miles into the distance, and also hearing beyond the reach of ordinary humans, an attribute known as clairaudience. The figure is dressed in a way that suggests he's one of the Emperor's major generals. It's likely that the unidentified object in his hand is supposed to be symbolic, but we have no idea what it's symbolic of. A girdle book is, for the main part, exactly what it sounds like: a small book that was worn at the waist with the use of a girdle. As impractical as this sounds, it was a popular way of carrying books during the medieval period in Europe. The books were usually devotional texts, such as psalters or prayer books, which were intended for personal use. While the first girdle books were simply designed to be practical and portable, allowing the wearer to carry them around with them at all times, later ones were often elaborately decorated with intricate designs and precious materials, such as gold or ivory. The books were made using parchment, and their small size meant that they were a favorite of publishers because their small size meant the publishers used less parchment to make them. The use of the girdle book declined in the 16th century, as bound books became more popular. However, the concept of a portable book that could be carried on the person persisted and evolved into the pocketbook. Today, surviving examples of girdle books are rare and highly prized by collectors and museums. The history of the artifacts known as the Jordan lead codices is controversial. The lead books were allegedly discovered deep in a cave in Jordan in March 2011. The metal pages contain entries related to the Kabbalah school of Jewish mysticism. After a year of investigation, numerous experts, including those employed by the BBC in the UK, dismissed them as fakes. 4 years later, an investigation by the UK's University of Sussex was able to prove that the lead used in the books is ancient, but couldn't determine the age of the inscriptions upon them. Since then, nobody's been able to agree on whether the codices are real or fake. The pages are 2,000 years old, and so are the fragments of leather that bind them together. But historians have said that the inscriptions are full of errors and are inconsistent, which suggests that someone found an ancient book and attempted to make it more interesting by trying to pass it off as religiously significant. Those who believe in the veracity of the codices say that what's written on the pages is written in code, and this is why they don't appear to make sense. We don't expect this debate to end anytime soon. Most of you will have heard of the legend of the sword in the stone. It's connected to the legend of King Arthur of England. What most people don't know is that there's another sword in the stone, and it's not in England. Instead, it's at Monte Siepi Channel in Cestino, Italy. Rather than laying in wait for the rightful king to come and pull it out of the stone, this sword was driven through its stone by a saint. This saint in question is Galgano Guidotti, who was born close to Cestino in 1148. He was once a wealthy knight, but became a hermit after turning to Christianity in later life. He claimed to have been visited by the archangel Michael, who told him to renounce all his worldly possessions. Galgano responded that he could no more do that than drive a sword through solid stone, and attempted to do so to demonstrate its impossibility. To his amazement, the sword passed straight through the stone and then became stuck fast. He died in 1185 and was declared a saint by Pope Lucius III the following year. Monte Siepi Chapel was then built around the sword in the stone. Tests have confirmed that the sword comes from the 12th century. So who's to say the story isn't true? Some controversy surrounds the authenticity of this next discovery, but we'll report it at face value. If the scientists and researchers of Bulgaria are correct about this discovery, then the very first golden treasure in history was created in northeast Bulgaria by the Varna people, and is approximately 7,000 years old. That would not only make this the world's oldest human-made gold, but it would also give the Varna a strong claim to being the oldest of all the European civilizations. The collection of golden treasures is diverse, including beads, animal designs, rings, and necklaces. The stories say that the whole collection was found by chance during the late 1970s, when a cannery was being built in the region, and 22-year-old Reo Muranov picked them up with his excavator. He stored them in a shoebox for a few days before taking them to local archaeologists. That qualified him for a financial reward equivalent to several times his monthly salary. Perhaps the most surprising object in the whole collection is a golden boomerang, which buries the idea that the device is an Australian invention. Sometimes an abandoned location gets a descriptive nickname that gives you a clue about what you might find there. Ani, in the Okakli Koyu region in Turkey, is nicknamed the Ghost City of 1001 Churches. With a name that enticing, who wouldn't want to visit it? The magnificent churches and buildings of Ali are falling to pieces. But this was once a mighty city, home to 200,000 people. The area it's situated within has always been hotly contested, and even now Armenia claims to have the right to the land. Territorial disputes made Ani a regular target for invaders, and it was also prone to the occasional earthquake, leading to the abandonment of the city approximately 1,000 years ago. That wasn't long after the most recent building at the site, the Menukar Mosque, was built. As recently as 2004, you needed government permission to visit and photograph Ani. But as it's now become a tourist attraction, the authorities have become a little more relaxed in terms of how they treat visitors. Visiting Ani can be an eerie experience, but it's also sure to take your breath away. Dotaku are a type of bell-shaped bronze vessels that were produced in Japan during the Yayoi period between the 3rd century BCE and the 3rd century CE. It is believed that the vessels were used for ritual purposes and were probably brought to Japan from China and Korea. The dotaku was made using a unique casting technique that involved the use of a 2-piece clay mold, which was fired to harden it before molten bronze was poured into the cavity to form the shape of the bell. The bronze is thin, which makes the bells surprisingly delicate for such substantial-looking objects. The artifacts vary drastically in size, with the largest dotaku standing over 4 feet tall, while the smallest measures only a few inches in height. The bells are decorated with intricate designs that are believed to represent the religious beliefs and social hierarchy of the time. Dotaku is considered one of the most important cultural artifacts of Japan's ancient past, and their discovery has contributed significantly to our understanding of the Yayoi period. Today, the bells are highly valued and have become a symbol of Japan's cultural heritage. Many of us have wind chimes in our gardens or hanging close to our windows. That's something we have in common with the ancient Romans, who were also fond of wind chimes. The difference is that the Romans called them tintinnabula and saw them as more than an assembly of bells that made a pleasant sound. A typical tintinnabulum would take the form of a male human figure with an enormous phallus. While we would see such a sculpture as crude today, 2,000 years ago figures like these were thought to have magical properties. A tintinnabulum was said to be capable of warding evil spirits away from family homes, nullifying the effects of curses like the evil eye, and bringing prosperity and good fortune to their owners. If someone was ill, the belief was that if you had a symbolic phallus, you could beat it off. For those reasons, the objects were commonly hung above or close to doors. Roman soldiers even used penis amulets when they headed into battle, in the hope that their dangling phalli would protect them. Although in those cases, we are fairly sure the phalli didn't chime or jingle. If you saw Rani Ki Vav in Patan, India, without being told what you were looking at, your first thought would probably be that the structure must be an ancient temple. It's as ornate and elaborately decorated as any temple in the country, but that isn't why it was built. This is actually an ancient stepwell. The ancient people of Tibetan probably thought of it as a sacred structure, though, because without it, they wouldn't have had any water to drink during the scorching summer months. This is the largest of all the stepwells in the area, with pavilions that extend hundreds of feet below the ground. Not content with building the well, its creators embellished it with more than 1,500 religious sculptures. The most commonly accepted version of its history is that construction work on Rani Ki Vav began in the year 1032 under the leadership of Rani Udaimati. Aside from providing water solutions, the well temple was intended as a tribute to Raha Bivdev, who founded the Solanki dynasty. When the Saraswati River burst its banks during antiquity, the resulting flood silted over the entire well. It remained half buried in filth until a major restoration project in the 1980s. Now it looks almost exactly as it did when it was brand new 1,000 years ago.
Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching and see you soon!